I want everyone in this debate room right now to take a quick look around. Look at the lights, look at the tables, the fact that you are sitting here safely listening to my speech. The only reason we can have this debate, the only reason we can talk about fairness or rules or who wins and who loses is because we are safe, panel. We are in a state of peace. If there were bombs falling outside this building right now, none of us would care about the rules of debating. We would only care about surviving. That is exactly what this debate is about. PROP stands for a simple truth. You cannot have a fair society, you cannot have laws, and you cannot have justice if you are dead. When a war is ending, a country is sitting on a knife edge, one wrong move and a violence starts all over again. In that specific, fragile moment, we believe that prioritizing peace, stopping the bullets, is more important than prioritizing immediate punishment proud to propose. So let's be clear about what we are debating today. By peace, we mean the absence of violence. We mean the ceasefire when people stop dying and refugees who can go home. By justice, we mean holding people accountable, putting warlords in prison, punishing soldiers, and trying to balance the scales for what happened. Our model is this: the debate should be about post-conflict states, because those are the states within which governments and the people are usually forced to make this choice between peace and justice. In most stable countries like Hong Kong, peace and justice coexist, so there's no need to prioritize one over the other. So this debate is about what the priorities of the people within the post-conflict state should be. Therefore, we should prioritize deals that end the war, even if that means granting amnesty, delaying trials, or using truth commissions instead of jail time. We are not saying justice is bad. We are saying that when you have to choose between stopping a war and punishing a criminal, you must choose to stop the war. Our first and most important argument is that if you chase justice too early, you force the war to continue. Think about the mindset of a dictator or a militia leader at the end of a conflict. These people have guns, they have soldiers, and they still have power. If prop side says, the moment you surrender, we're going to arrest you and put you in jail for the rest of your life, what is the leader going to do? They're going to keep fighting. It is rational choice. If surrender means prison, they have zero incentive to stop the war. They will fight to the death to protect themselves. They will burn more villages and kill more people because they feel like cornered animals with no exit. However, if we prioritize peace, we give them a way out of this. We offer amnesty or exile or a power-sharing deal. Is it fair? No. It feels terrible to let a bad person go, but the comparative is much worse. The comparative is that the war drags on for 5 more years. OP has to explain to you, therefore, why it is worth sacrificing thousands more innocent lives just to put one general in handcuffs. We believe that the primary duty of any government is to keep its citizens alive. Dead people cannot receive justice. A destroyed country cannot hold a fair trial. So our second argument is that you cannot deliver real justice in a war zone. OP paints a picture of a perfect courtroom with a judge in a wig and unshakable evidence. But that is not what a post-conflict country looks like. The courts are bombed out, the judges are terrified that if they give the wrong verdict, they will be assassinated. Witnesses are too scared to testify because the militias are walking the streets. If you try to force justice in this chaos, it doesn't look like fairness, it looks like revenge. It usually becomes victor's justice, where the one winning side puts the losing side in jail while ignoring their own crimes. This is dangerous because it destroys trust. If the people see the court system being used as a political weapon to crush enemies, they won't respect the law. They will just see it as another form of war. So on prop side, we say, wait. Prioritize peace first, stabilize the country, build up the police force so witnesses are safe, let the anger cool down. If you wait for stability, you can eventually have real, fair trials like we saw years later in places like Germany or Rwanda. But if you rush it now, you don't get justice, you just get a show trial that makes everything worse. Panel, this is a hard debate because we all want to see bad people punished. It feels morally right to say justice matters most. But in the real world, idealism can get people killed. If prioritizing justice means the war restarts, then that justice is definitely not worth it. If prioritizing justice means the courts are corrupt and biased, then the justice is fake. We are proud to stand on the side of reality. We choose to save lives first. We choose to stabilize the country first, because only when the guns are silent can we ever hope to talk about what is right and what is wrong. And for these reasons, this motion must and will stand. Never been prouder to propose.
Peace can be rebuilt over the long term, but if justice is not restored now, society may lose its chance to ever become truly just. Some layers of framing often thinks the definition of peace as stop the killing is really short term. Prop's peace is very short term. I think making the short term peace takes a lot of years itself. By the time they solve the problem, they already don't care who started it because it's already over. People don't want to think about this more because it already took so many years to deal with it and make peace for itself. This means that there is every reason for a conflict to start again, and it's very in the peace prop states is very short term. Prop says justice is very corrupt after conflicts and it just won't work. I think OP thinks that this is the exact reason why international organizations like the UN dispute tribunals exist. Instead of waiting, we bring external help for justice to ensure peace later on. All the examples that might stand for happened before these kind of international organizations. For instance, the Rwanda Civil War massacre happened way before the UN dispute tribunals existed. Then some rebuttals. I think the peace, they say that their nuance is that peace is the prerequisite of justice. I think peace and prop again is really unstable because the reason is never solved and they are always vulnerable to like new conflict coming home. I think leaders trying to not sit down is really outdated because in today's world, international organizations exist. Again, things like Rwanda Civil War happened way before these organizations existed. I think now the international organization will interfere to like force the leader to step down or coerce them. I think those things will not happen in today's world. I think lastly, prop case depends on less conflict. I think there will be recurring conflicts in the future because the reason for original conflict still exists, but even if you bite the bullet, hidden conflicts will still happen because countries like North Korea secretly quotes and secretly quiets and oppresses people to look as if they are in peace. Then first argument on how peace without justice is morally meaningless. The mechanism here is that fake peace can exist under things like oppression, exploitation, silence, and whatnot. In North Korea, they seem to have superficial peace as people seemed to respect the government. There's no such thing as revolting against authority. I think this is really created out of oppression. Therefore, society can be called peaceful simply because people are too scared to resist. This isn't real peace. The impact here is that this isn't a stable peace. It's a hostage situation. By prioritizing peace, you reward whoever is most willing to be violent because the state will always give in to them just to keep the silence. I think justice then, under comparative, is just the floor, not the ceiling. I think this is a metaphor because you cannot have a peaceful house if the foundation is built on a crime scene and recurring crime scenes in the future because they are really unstable. The way in here is that a short-term peace is worse than a justice that might be disruptive because the disruptive justice will soon still calm down on our side of the house. Because short-term peace is really unstable and can go back to chaos at any time. Justice creates lasting peace, but peace on prop is really unstable and it doesn't stand on the long term. The second argument on why this is the only time to reconstruct, the main mechanism is on victim closure. Why is victim closure harder later? Because evidence becomes unclearer later. First, physical evidence is lost. Secondly, witnesses either lose memory or pass away. Without primary testimony, the villains can claim historical ambiguity and get away with it. The failure to punish traitors after 1945 during the Japanese colonization of Korea led to a lot of long-term issues inside South Korea. Many traitors used their wealth and position gained after the conflict to integrate into the post-war police, the military, etc. By the time society tried to address it, they were probably gone and claimed innocence. Also, there's backlash. People think it's unfair for these kind of people to have such a high role in society. I think justice becomes harder when the villains are no longer the perpetrators. This looks like the original villain passing away and their descendants inheriting the blame. Therefore, justice should be imposed right away. I think the impact here is that is on victims' emotional and psychological relief. Because victims feel catharsis after the villains get punished. Victims can now accuse perpetrators of wrongdoing and receive financial repayment or are not so proud to oppose.
You cannot hold trial so the next person getting shot is the judge. Justice cannot exist without peace first. In my speech, a few rebuttals, an extension, and an argument. The opposition tells us that peace takes too long and justice is forgotten about after you get peace. That's a false choice. We don't forget justice while building peace. We build the only platform where justice can actually stand by building peace. Their justice now is a trial held at gunpoint. That is not just. It's victor's vengeance, not law. It guarantees the losing side sees it as an act of war, not fairness. It plants the seeds for the next conflict to boil up again. Our peace is the active, structured creation of a safe place where you can actually have a court that's not held at gunpoint. From that stable foundation, a legitimate, lasting justice can actually be built. Even if we take them at their most extreme and say, yes, justice may be forgotten about, at least we have a space where people can exist without the constant fear of gunshots. It's impossible to hold a fair trial that's actually just when the court is pressured by these gunshots, right? When we have a space where people are not constantly fearing being killed the next second, this is actually a space where people can even discuss justice. They tell us that we lose victim closure, but however, the closure that they promise is actually a myth. The verdict doesn't heal trauma. Safety and a future do. The victims want a safe life where they're not afraid of the next gunshot first. Their justice traumatizes victims through endless volatile trials while making them targets into targets in a society that has yet to heal from the conflict. It trades their chance for a peaceful life for a fleeting moment of vengeance. When the court isn't just, the victim isn't healed. Now, onto my extension to peace as a premise for justice. A few impacts of this. When we first have a peaceful situation, even if temporary to work with, we end up with fair and much more legitimate justice. This is the kind of justice that actually sustains, and only when we have peace as a premise can we achieve this justice. Even if we don't achieve the perfect ideal justice that Op wants, we still see a society prioritizing conflict, getting closure, mediated outcomes over an endless pursuit of perfect justice. We see governments not being afraid of tough, pragmatic decisions. We see a solution that's actually sustainable in our imperfect world. When we prioritize this, we start refusing to let past injustices justify new ones. This stops tit-for-tat violence that prolongs conflicts. We actually see a law for what it should be, where it focuses on preventing future harms over achieving the perfect retribution for every past wrongs. Yes, I'll take that POI. Wait,
don't we have UN dispute tribunals?
I'm sorry, what?
Don't we have UN dispute tribunals to avoid all the harms you state?
You do realize that post-Civil War conflicts, the area is not stable. It's very difficult, even with humanitarian aid, to have a stable environment. It's hard to hold a fair trial within that area when all the people care about is vengeance from the victor. Now, onto some quick points of weight here. On their side, we see quick and fast justice that doesn't actually last. With peace before justice in our world, we get better justice and actual peace. We get justice that people are happy with, that is legitimate, that does not bring up another conflict. Now, onto my argument. Peace breaks the cycle of hatred that causes conflict to boil up again. Prioritizing peace is the only way to actually fix a society so that people can live together properly again. Civil war, like many other things, is not black nor white, but instead gray. After civil conflict, there's no single truth. This means there's no single good guy or bad guy. The winners and losers have completely opposing stories of heroism, victimhood, and blame. Imposing one group's justice is seen by the other as victor's vengeance. It cements these parallel realities. Harsh justice forces people to retrench into their wartime identities to survive the new legal persecution. Peace allows these identities to soften and actually evolve. We can have justice, but we need a mutual understanding and acknowledgement first so we have the platform to even talk about justice. Hatred needs revenge to survive. It needs revenge to justify itself. Every punished moment only gives people more reason to fight, more reason to hate the state. Only on our side do we stop feeding into the cycle. Even if we have yet to right all the wrongs of our past, we have at least created a society that is calm and rational enough to work towards it, to talk about it. Op skips this stage entirely, which is why they see conflicts boiling up again, hence proud to propose.
When Proposition talks a big deal about how peace is the main reason we still live without war, I think they ignore that the short-term calm comfort alone doesn't stop violence from happening again. We think that is a big issue that they fail to recognize on their side of the house. Because justice works in two ways. Things like punishing wrongdoers teaches them not to repeat crimes, and showing society that crime is unacceptable discourages others, and they're likely to stop that violence whatsoever. And we think that makes peace durable in a way that temporary calm and emotional comfort never can on their side of the house. Few rebuttals then. They talk about how our leader opposition already tells you that we have institutions like UN dispute tribunals. Because DPM never engages with this, and they just repeat what Prime Minister says. She just said that the leader won't step down. She responds to the POI by simply saying that the place is unstable. That's the reason these institutions exist, Judge. Because if the place was stable, we wouldn't have made it from the first place. We think that is a very important benefit of justice at the end of the day. Because these institutions are trained to solve these sorts of problems, and Deputy doesn't understand what the real world right now looks like. So they say that with a stable foundation, trials can be held later. But I think that yes, some level of order is needed for trials to physically happen. But I think this doesn't mean that justice should be delayed until peace is completely secured at the end of the day. Because the question is whether justice is most effective, and it's not whether these courts need actual order at the end of the day. Because when they say that waiting for perfect stability before trials, we tell you that this actually destabilizes society, because things like evidence becomes less credible. Witnesses either disappear or die. Perpetrators gain more power, money, or legitimacy, like what our first speaker tells you. Because by the time trials happen, they're weaker, they're more contested, and they're seen as things like political revenge. And I think that's unacceptable at the end of the day at like the reputation of justice. Yeah, so like the proposition also says that prioritizing peace is the only way to fix society, but I think this is not true, because even if peace stops immediate violence, it doesn't like completely engage with the main problems that caused the conflict to happen in the first place. Things like injustice or the abuse of power or the imbalance of power between certain parties. Because without justice, society will remain quiet, but like the reasons for fighting, like the main causes, it leaves the very vulnerable to new conflicts. So extension about like deterrence, then we tell you that on our side of the house, like with justice, like there's less likelihood that the violence will happen again, because at the end of the day, the trade-off here is then between the short-term emotional comfort and long-term safety. Because even if peace stops the fighting for now, we feel that it doesn't change why people act violently. And the first layer here is that about like the direct punishment. When like the perpetrators are held accountable, they're likely to learn that these harmful actions have like costs and consequences, and this makes them less likely to repeat the same behavior. Like number two, then about society-wide warning. When justice is applied, everyone sees that the crime is not tolerated, because that certain like the original perpetrator is being punished through justice, and this discourages others from trying the same thing. And we tell you that on our side, through this following this through this we have less long-term violence at the end of the day. So we tell you that punishing wrongdoing, it's a very like big impact to society, that harmful actions will not be tolerated. And we tell you that at the end of the day, we opposition is the side that reduces the likelihood that the similar actions will occur again, even though they have like harmed people in some way. So proud to oppose.
We all want justice, but you cannot deliver justice in a graveyard. Our side faces a simple, urgent truth. We must stop the killing before we can even begin to talk about justice. Proud to propose. In my speech, I will present a few rebuttals and then present 3 clashes about timing, society, and protection. Opposition claims justice will be forgotten on our side, but we create the stable conditions where memory can be turned into evidence. In opposition's model, witnesses are dead or in hiding, courthouses are destroyed, and the terror is continued. That is what makes justice impossible. In our model, once peace is secured, you have the time, safety, and institutional space to gather testimonies, preserve mass graves as evidence, and build legitimate courts. Opposition says that they can get international courts or people to deliver justice first, but external justice depends entirely on local stability. Investigators can't enter an active war zone to collect evidence. UN peacekeepers sent to arrest a warlord they become middlemen, escalating the conflict, not delivering justice. External justice requires local cooperation, safe access, and at least a functioning state, all of which are products of peace. Thirdly, if justice teaches people not to do crime again, then why aren't trials the highest priority in the current world? After a war breaks out, the priority is to restore peace and help protect the ones affected, not to bring a judge in and try to prosecute the criminal. This is the same logic with hostages. When someone is taken hostage, you don't try to arrest the prosecutor. The priority is negotiating and getting these victims out alive, which is the same logic on our side. So now on to my first class about timing. In a burning building, you put the fire out before you investigate the arsonist. Every day of war means more deaths, refugees, and destroyed infrastructure, making any future justice harder. They say our peace is fragile. Okay, but their justice is impossible during a war. To have a trial, you need safe streets for the judge to drive to court. You need witnesses who aren't hiding in a refugee camp. If you don't have peace, you have none of these things. So their plan can't even start. This clash is the most important, and we win it because the opposition is trying to create a world that won't even work in the first place. A peace deal can be signed in days. It creates an immediate change on the ground. No more battles, people come out from hiding. Justice involves so many steps. Investigations, evidence collection, fair trials, these all take years. To save a life tomorrow, you sign a ceasefire, not wait to hold a trial. Now on to my second clash about society. Look, the opposition could say warlords are greedy for power and will cheat any deal. Maybe some will, but here's the key. Once you have a peace deal, the whole world is watching. The UN can come in. Aid money will flow in. That warlord, now a minister or important figure, is on TV. If he decides to start fighting again, he loses his nice suit, his office, all his privileges. Proposition changes his life so that starting war becomes a stupid choice for him, and we make peace more valuable to him than fighting. So why is this likely to happen? The moment we're debating
wrongdoing is after a war, when a peace deal is possible. This usually means no side can win outright. They're exhausted, soldiers are tired, supplies are low, and fundings decrease, so they have no choice but to agree. Now to on my third clash about protection. The greatest threat to a victim isn't the lack of a trial. It's another bomb falling on their house. We prioritize physical protection. Amnesty makes fighters stop. A commander who gets a deal has no reason to keep attacking that village. The violence against these specific victims end. Ceasefires let food, doctor, and shelter reach people who are starving and wounded. Justice can't help people who are dying waiting for a trial. If you try to arrest a warlord while he's still strong, then he will attack witnesses to protect himself. Amnesty takes away his reason to hurt victims, and they are no longer a threat to his freedom. Do you want victims to have a perfect trial later or to be alive later? In a genocide, trying to arrest leaders during the killing would make them fight harder and longer. We are not saying justice or punishing wrongdoing is bad. We are saying that when you have to choose between stopping a war and punishing a criminal, you must choose to stop a war. Proud to propose. Thank you very much.
Two things in my speech: rebuttals and clash. Moving on to rebuttals, they say that hey, external justice can't deliver real justice, and we need a functional state first. Like for example, like a hostage negotiation. First on mitigation, I think we just conceded the point on yes, a functional state matters, and external actors are oftentimes imperfect and can feel distant. And also restoring basic orders and safety is important. But we still think that none of this proves that justice must be postponed or external justice is illegitimate. Then second, I think external justice exists because the internal systems are broke. Because government says that, hey, external justice is flawed because outsiders become middlemen. But that's exactly the point. After war, I think domestic courts are extremely biased, destroyed, and controlled by a lot of these perpetrators, right? And police and judges are oftentimes compromised and biased, meaning that victims cannot safely accuse powerful actors. I think external justice is the most important because it's not used instead of the state, but it's a trustworthy entity that can be trusted within this process. Then let's flip this argument and say that justice is actually how you build a functional state. I think government treats justice as a reward after peace. Opposition tells you that, hey, justice is a tool for state building. If you punish perpetrators, it removes violent actors from power. And it, for example, it creates legitimacy for new institutions. I think a state built without accountability is stable only on paper. In reality, it's very weak and it's very distrusted. That's why we win. Then they also talk about, hey, external justice. They also talk about like trials and justice cannot appear because of things like vengeance. Let's just mitigate this and say that yes, after like a conflict, emotions are high and victims are angry and whatnot. But that doesn't mean that justice is impossible, but it rather means that justice should be in a structured way. Second, I think delaying justice makes vengeance worse, not better. Vengeance thrives when perpetrators are walking free in societies and victims feel ignored and institutions refuse to act. Then third, let's flip their point on vengeance and say that we tell you that trials are how societies move from vengeance to law. Government assumes that people must come down before justice. I think we can flip this and say that trials replace mob justice with things like legal standards, and external courts also exist to handle post-war bias. Then lastly, they talk about how justice can be made later. I think this is like a nonsense point because first, evidence is prone to disappearing because these real victims might not even be alive, or these witnesses might oftentimes refuse to do it because like time has already passed. And I think when justice is delayed, perpetrators oftentimes already gain political power. For example, they enter the military or already have like high social classes. That's why it becomes harder to punish the perpetrators that actually make justice possible. Then single clash on stability. I think this is the most important thing in this debate. The government model prioritizes stopping violence now, even if justice is delayed or abandoned. But we tell you that yes, guns might go silent, but perpetrators remain unaccountable and victims remain unresentful. And like all these problems remain unresolved. This creates frozen conflict, and this isn't peace at the end of the day. A society where people are quiet just because they're scared, silenced, or exhausted is not stable, but rather it's like very violent. A conflict can restart when like conditions can change a little bit. Therefore, their point on stability is extremely weak. Second, I think opposition stability is much more durable compared to their side because it removes the causes of conflict, because usually the causes of conflict are the perpetrators or the person who are the aggressors, right? Opposition prioritizes, and we tell you that when we should punish these individuals when evidence still exists and perpetrators are still able to be identifiable and not dead, and institutions are being rebuilt with legitimacy. I think justice does mainly three things and government never answers to these points. First, we close these moral wounds for these victims, meaning that we have victim compensation. Second, we we make violence unjust, serving as an example for other people to stop these types of war. Lastly, we restore trust in institutions. Therefore, when people believe that the system is fair, they do not resort to revenge, vigilantism, or rebellion. Then, on comparison, I think government prioritizes peace first, meaning that in the short term they might have peace, but in the future they have violence. Opposition accepts short-term difficulty to prevent the future war. I think the most important thing is long-term stability in this debate. With this, we win this debate. Then we think that a quiet injustice is not peace. Rather, it's like a countdown. Because only justice removes the reasons why people fight in the first place. That's why we're proud to oppose. Thank you.
Opposition builds a building that breaks down a year later. I think side opposition doesn't do that. On side props world, you get a ceasefire, but the dictator stays in power or whatnot because the citizens fear standing up. They will not solve the problem or stand up against the dictator. This is the case in North Korea, as I said in my LO speech. The victims see this, they get angry, and they get angry, but they don't show this they don't show this, but the conflicts reoccur. Look at Libya or South Sudan. Agreements were made to stop the fighting, but because no one was held accountable, the violence just restarted, right? I think this creates an echo chamber. I think justice might make the war harder to end right now, but when it ends, it's over for good and it's long term compared to problem. By removing the reason for the conflict, I think we have more of a long-term solution compared to Prop. Prop also argues that leaders won't step down if they fear trial. I think you tell every dictator, if you kill enough people, the world will eventually get tired and offer you a luxury retirement and exile. I think this is really, really wrong. You're literally incentivizing genocide as a negotiation tactic for later on people. I think Prop's world makes the world more dangerous, as I said earlier on, and our team said earlier on. For everyone tomorrow, our world makes it safer because we have a more long-term solution and we avoid conflicts later on. Side Op never responds to our argument on victim closure, right? We want to emphasize that when evidence becomes lost, it leads to backlash, and people who commit wrongdoings coming into higher roles. This also gives deterrence because in the long term we have better outcomes because we get rid of reasons of the conflict from the get-go. Note that they never give us any real-world examples. They never respond to what happens in North Korea. They never respond to how the examples that stand on their side happened a long time ago. We tell you that the institutions we have are trained to interfere and solve the problem. That's why we don't have those kind of ongoing conflicts right now on our side of the house. Even if they happen, they're very minor and they never respond to this. They don't drop this. We tell you that side prop wants to run a parallel debate. So proud to oppose.
Panel, let's be clear about what this debate was not about. It was not a debate about whether justice is good or whether warlords deserve to be punished. Both sides agree on that. The difference is that Op views justice as an immediate demand that must be satisfied regardless of the cost, whereas we view peace as an absolute prerequisite that makes justice possible. We win the debate on two major comparatives. First, the incentive to end war, and second of all, the physical reality of the courtroom. First, look at the comparative on ending violence. Our case was simple. If you prioritize immediate justice, you tell a dictator that the moment they stop fighting, they go to prison. We told you this backs them into a corner. They will fight to death to survive. Op never rebutted to this mechanism, note that. They simply asserted that justice deters future crime. Compare the weighing here. Op is willing to prolong the current war and sacrifice the people currently dying in the hopes that a trial might scare a future dictator 10 years from now. We prioritize the immediately cessation of violence. We argue that you cannot prioritize the moral satisfaction of a trial over the physical survival of the victims. If the price of stopping a genocide is a delayed sentence for the general, that is a price we must pay, judge, because dead citizens cannot receive justice. Second, look at the comparative on the machinery of justice. Op's entire case relied on a fantasy. They talked about international courts like the UN and how it magically intervenes while bullets are still flying through the air. They argue that because the UN exists, domestic stability doesn't matter. This collapses on a comparative of access. We explained that you cannot serve a warrant to a warlord who is currently shelling a city. You cannot send investigators to a mass grave that is behind enemy lines. By prioritizing justice over the ceasefire, Op ensures the war continues, meaning the UN never gets the access it needs. They argue that waiting loses evidence because witnesses die or forget in their last speech. But panel, ask yourselves, what destroys evidence faster, the passage of time or the active artillery fire? On our side, we secure the peace to keep the witnesses alive so they can testify later. On their side, the witness is killed in the conflict they refused to end. Now, final weighing, Op offered you a moral high ground that is built on a graveyard. They want you to hold the trial immediately, even if it means the war rages on. We offered you the only logical sequence in this debate. You must extinguish a fire before you can investigate the person. Now, because we recognize that you cannot build a roof without a foundation, flipping what they said, and you cannot deliver justice to a dead person, proposition wins indefinitely. Never been prouder to propose.